So this is agenda item, what was 3? Review of draft kratom regulation, discussion, and possible vote to send to legal counsel for review. I want to thank you guys for being here, and the people online and folks that have been communicating with us by email over the, since November. We are here now not to debate it anymore, and I know that you're not surprised by that. The rationale for all of this is online. It's in our meetings. It's in our minutes. It's recorded. So here we are. So the conversation really is about what are we going to do with the draft. If there were questions from Ashland residents about the draft, I would address them. But since there aren't any, I'm just going to hop right into this. So we actually haven't met since May 5th to talk about this. Now, I know that there was a draft that went out on the 30th of May, but we never got a chance to talk about it. So what I want to report here, it's 2 pages of my notes on what's been happening since then, because I think that it's important, and I'll go through it as quickly as I can and try so that you all make sense of it. And Maurice, if you have questions, I think maybe just we'll wait to the end and then do the discussion or questions. But I've part 3 parts. One are the regulatory developments, which have occurred since May 30th, actually May 5th. Part 2 is the outreach of people that I've met with that kind of influence the way that the draft looks at this point, and then just some other interesting information that I think people might want. And then part 3 are the draft updates. I know the board and everybody read the draft, but I think just for the record, I'll go through what those updates were so that they can be in the minutes. All right, and then we can talk. So let's see. So regulatory developments, as many of you probably know, on July 1st, this past July, the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, put 7-hydroxymetragenine and analogs, actually 3 analogs, into Schedule I, temporary scheduling for those. Temporary scheduling for up to 3 years, which history tells us when that happens, they usually go into permanent scheduling. They have not touched or regulated the natural leaf, the botanical kratom plant. They made that very clear in their press release, but they did send out the notice of intent on 7-hydroxymetragenine. Any product that is under 0.05% dry weight containing that much 7-OH would be banned. So that would be, say, a leaf product that has more than that, which I can tell you you're probably not going to find if it's the natural substance. So the DEA has taken a step to clearly delineate the natural botanical product from these analogs, from the synthetics and semi-synthetic compounds. Let's see, Massachusetts. Things are moving through Massachusetts in a similar direction. I don't know the number of the House bill, but there is a committee bill that came through the Committee of the Judiciary, and that was in, you can look this up. If I had it, I would tell you what the number was. That was in the spring, and that's a committee. That's not an individual House member that's sponsoring a bill. It's an entire committee. It's a regulation bill. Now, there are a bunch of them that are kind of moving through. Some are bans, some are regulations. That one, from what I understand, has gotten pretty far, but the one that has gotten the furthest is part of the Economic Development Bill, which was just passed on July 8th. So just, a week and a half ago or something like that. So as part of that big $500 million, $400 million package, there is a kratom regulation in there. So that's the furthest that this has gotten in the state, and what it suggests is this is the way things are moving. I'm not saying that to justify necessarily what we're doing. I'm just saying that what we're doing with our regulation is aligned with where the state seems to be headed and where the feds have drawn the line. So that's the regulatory stuff. And just hold off if you have any questions on that. I mean, that's about as much as I know anyway for that. In terms of outreach, as Amy said, I met with Amy a couple of times, mainly just to get a sense of where she stands and to try to explain where the board stands on it. And I thought that they were very good meetings. And actually, after the first meeting, I had a meeting the next day with Oliver Grunman from the University of Florida, And Amy brought up some stuff about the draft regulation, saw some spots that had gaps in a whole bunch of different things, but mainly related to percentages of 7-hydroxymetragenine, not naming metragenine in the ingredients list, or not requiring it. So and I'm going to get into this more, but just, high level, there were a bunch of things that she helped me kind of get a better grip on at that point. And that was already a well-developed draft, I think. So I took that information and I met with Oliver Grundman. Dr. Grundman, I mentioned him before. He's a professor at University of Florida. He is kind of at the intersection between the pharmacology of kratom and other drugs of abuse, use patterns in humans, and policy. So he studies all of that stuff. Sorry, can you just make sure? I'm sorry. So he's published quite a bit on this. I won't go into it because I think I've talked about this before. But I took those concerns about, metragenine concentrations, whether or not it should be in the draft, 7-hydroxy levels, all of these things, and a bunch of other stuff. And he was really helpful. He and was, really nice, a nice collaborator. He took the draft, he went through it, he got it back to me the next day with a bunch of comments. I incorporated it. Everything that we talked about, Amy, is in there. I know you probably, and more than what I talked to him about. So, like our labeling stuff that we talked about, and the warnings and habit forming, all of that stuff. So really tried to pack it into this extremely comprehensive, extremely restrictive, leaf only, nothing that you can walk out of a store with and drink, nothing concentrated, nothing that you can have that's actually removed from the plant unless you make a tea at home. So when people say, I only use the leaf, this is all you're going to get in Ashland, is just the leaf. So, that's kind of how I think that this should work. And according to Oliver Grundman, that should be sufficient for the folks that have come to rely on this. So anyway, I'm going to get into what all those specs are in a minute. The other thing was also, after the conversation with Amy, I set up a meeting with a guy named Dan McMahon. And Dan is a North Attleboro Board of Health member. So you may remember, North Attleboro is one of only 2 towns in Massachusetts that have actually regulated kratom. I think there's 20 or so towns that have banned it, and the rest don't have any bans or regulations. So I wanted to know, how did you, because one of the things that came up in the conversation with Amy was, well, why can't you just allow it at tobacco stores? Like, get it out of gas stations and convenience stores so that people aren't seeing it. It's not as accessible, and I totally get that. The problem with that, though, is that we don't have tobacco stores in Ashland, and we would prefer not to. But anyway, I still set up the meeting with him because that's the way they did it. He described it to me. It started in 2023. It came to the Board of Health. They were all ready to ban it. They paused. They looked at the data. They saw that people were using it for this and that, and felt as though they wanted to make a compromise and allow adults to access it. They didn't, as far as I know, they didn't remove any of the concentrated products or anything like that. They just simply said, if we're going to have this, it's only going to be available in adult tobacco stores, age 21, and that's it. So he described that to me. It seemed to go over well in North Attleboro. He didn't say that there were many problems with that, and apparently they do regular inspections, and this has been going on for like 2.5 years, and he said that they haven't had any issues. So I thought that was interesting, and I mainly put this in here because I wanted to kind of report back on that. The last person that I've talked to recently was a gentleman named Representative Brian Patrick Kennedy. He is the temporary Speaker of the House in Rhode Island. Now, the background on this is that and I hope I have all this right, in 2017, the Rhode Island legislature, no, it was actually the health department, decided to put into Rhode Island's Schedule 1 or Class 1, all kratom products. So whether it's 7-hydroxymetragenine, kratom, whatever, the entire thing was a full-on ban that was in 2017. For the following 8 years, Representative Kennedy and some of his colleagues were trying to reverse that and put into place a consumer, like a Kratom Consumer Protection Act type of thing, where they would allow the leaf and get rid of the concentrated synthetic products. And he has a whole rationale for that, and that's why I contacted him, because this actually went through in 2025, so this time last year. They were successful in doing that. It was signed by the governor, so the ban was completely repealed, and it went into effect on April 1st of this year. And so when I found that out, I contacted him because I wanted to know, what did the ban actually produce, if anything, and what was your thinking about, how did you weigh the harm and, any of the dependence issues and all the things that we talk about, right, the risks. So this was an email exchange. He got right back to me. I can tell you I've summarized basically what he said, and this is it. He said that the ban didn't eliminate use. Rather, it eliminated legal in-state access. Consumers, many using kratom for pain, mental health, or to stay off opioids, shifted to online, out-of-state sellers with less transparency and no quality control. And by the way, I don't think they allow online sales in Rhode Island. I think it's only storefront face-to-face. So I don't know how that's going to work with the federal system now, but anyway, I believe that that's true. So he frames this as it was sort of a worse public health outcome than regulation to ban it. And those are my words, not his, because this is all paraphrased. He said that Rhode Island didn't, and again, this is all paraphrased, Rhode Island didn't dismiss the dependence risk. He explicitly acknowledged that kratom leaf can cause dependence and withdrawal, but the policy question was whether the risks justified the prohibition, especially given reports of people using it to avoid opioids, alcohol, or more dangerous substances. And so they concluded that regulation and not prohibition was the more responsible path. He then cited some scientific evidence. You probably know about this, that the NIH has filed an IND to do studies on metragenine. The idea is that you need IRB approval for that. If you have IRB approval, then the risks, the benefits outweigh the risks. So that's sort of a metric for IRB approval. So he cited that. FDA did a dose finding study. They showed it was well tolerated. I'm sure you've seen the papers, Amy. So he cited the science. And then finally, he made a point of saying that they worked with the Department of Health on this. So the Department of Health helped write up those regulations. And so that's kind of the discussion in a nutshell. And I got back to him and asked if he could put me in touch with someone at the Department of Health in Rhode Island. Not that we need it for this, because I think I've seen their regulation. I like this one. But I just thought it would be informative to talk to somebody there. And so maybe I will at some point. So that was the last person I talked to. Okay, so that's part 2. And then part 3 are the regulation draft updates. So here they are. What's new, what's different from the May 30th version. And for those of you online, if you look at the Ashland website, what you're actually seeing is the draft version from, I believe, March. So it's way back. It's not the May 30th version, because we hadn't discussed the May 30th version, so we never put that up there. But when I went on it today, it was the one for March. So you're looking at one that's kind of way back. This newer one is quite different, and which is fine. Oh, you did? Okay, so there's a newer one. Okay. So the new ones aren't just attached to this agenda, they're on the website. Okay. All right, excellent. So what you will see, if you compare this to the draft that now no longer exists on the website, is that there's a change in alkaloid limits. First of all, 7-hydroxymetragenine is set at 0.05%, okay, 0.05%. That's an extremely small amount of 7-hydroxymetragenine. It's about what you find. Actually, if you have the most sensitive analytical method, it's very hard to find 7-hydroxymetragenine in the leaf because it is a metabolic product of metragenine in the body. So that's when it causes all of the issues. But in the leaf, It's in very, very small concentrations. What you see in regulations is often 2%, which is absolutely huge. So if you actually had 7-hydroxymetrageny concentrations of 2% in a product that's a leaf, you would be in trouble. So I don't know whoever came up with that, but it's been carried over from regulation to regulation. It doesn't make any sense. Our conversations with Dr. Grudman, we switched it, and it turns out that the DEA agrees with that approach, and they did the same thing. So 0.05% 7-hydroxymetragenine, basically nothing. And then adding in metragenine. So if you look at, not package inserts, but labels of these products online, you see that they almost always label metragenine, but the regulations don't require it. But it's important because, as you point out, metragenine is the parent compound to 7-hydroxymetragenine. So it's the prodrug, it's getting metabolized, it's getting hydroxylated, and it's becoming the active or more active opiate. So you need to somehow control how much metragenine is in that original leaf product. As Amy pointed out, somebody could selectively breed a plant, a species of the kratom tree, Metragina speciosa, and have levels that are enormous and get around this if you don't actually have an amount there that is set at a limit. So normally in leaves, you see maybe 1% metragenine, 1.1, 1.2%. They go up to maybe about 1.8%. So there's a little range. You build in a little buffer because sometimes if the leaves are sitting out in the sun or whatever, different storage conditions, that level can change. That's my understanding. It's more likely that the 7-hydroxy product changes, but it could change. And so Dr. Grunman suggested that we make it 2.5% to just allow for some wiggle room there. So that's what we did. And that's, if you have been looking at a number of these regulations, as I have since November, nobody's doing that. I think that they will start to do that, but nobody's doing that. So I think it makes things very tight. The other thing is the way that you express these percentages. So in other regulations, what you will see is something like 7-hydroxymetragenine of this percentage of total alkaloid content. It's impossible to know the total alkaloid content unless you know absolutely every alkaloid that's in that plant, and they're still discovering new ones. So anybody could argue that you actually don't know the total alkaloid content, so it's kind of a ridiculous way to express this. The best way to do it, and the way we've always done it in laboratories, is you take your analyte, metragenine, you weigh where it came from, the leaves, and then you do the metragenine content over the total leaf weight, and you multiply by 100, and that gives you the percent. Very, very simple. Manufacturers, I should say distributors, are already doing this. These are things that are already listed. This is all just, so it's not asking anybody to do anything that isn't already being done. It's just making it mandatory. Okay. Let's see. In terms of objective adulteration standards, in the other regulation, what I had in there was the definition of adulteration was you had to prove that it injured somebody. And so that's difficult. The easiest way to do this is to just simply say anything that is not kratom leaf or ground up kratom in some form is adulterated. The capsule that it's in is allowed, and that's all fleshed out in the regulation. If it's in a tea bag or something like that, that's also in the regulation. But it can't be anything more than that. If it is, it's adulterated. You don't have to prove that anybody was harmed by it. Okay, so the threshold for adulteration is much lower now than what we had in there before. Semi-synthetics. I didn't have the term semi-synthetic, which I don't know why I didn't, because 7-hydroxymetragenine is a semi-synthetic. But I think I was always thinking about it as a synthetic, and I think other people had too. So that was a loophole. Dr. Grumman pointed that out very quickly. And so I went through and I changed and included and defined semi-synthetic, which is like heroin is semi-synthetic. You start with morphine, you make heroin from morphine, but you need the natural product, so it's semi-synthetic, and then something like fentanyl would be fully synthetic, right? So it's the same idea. The DEA got rid of both synthetics and semi-synthetics in this scheduling. let's see, and we don't even have to, so the DEA named, 3 compounds, 3 analogs that they're scheduling. We don't need to do that because by category, we've already excluded them. We've said that all you can have is leaf. You can't have anything else. So we don't need to necessarily keep up with the newer stuff that's coming out that are analogs to the metragonium family because it has to be a leaf, and everything else by category is excluded. So I think that that makes this tighter. Expanded labels. Thank you for this too, Amy. And when I say that, I know that you don't want the regulation, but nevertheless, it was helpful. So we expanded the labels, certainly all of the percentages, all of that. The milligram per serving amount, I didn't have in there initially. Serving size per 24-hour maximum. Dr. Grumman thought that that was really important. How much can you take safely, whatever safely might mean, within a 24-hour period. The mandatory health warnings are there now, potential harms, habit forming, lead to dependence, and other warnings. That's all tightened up. And then there are just some smaller cleanup redlined things to harmonize some of the terminology. So, and then the guide for retailers, which is just a suggestion. It's not part of the regulation, but if that's something we wanted to do, that was all changed in accordance with these changes in the draft. So in closing, I'll just say before we talk about this, again, it's not a ban. It's what I think is a reasonable health regulation using the board's authority, same authority as we use for tobacco. It's built on a consumer protection foundation. It's consistent with the federal regulation now, and I think where the state action is headed. It preserves lawful access to the leaf, but gets rid of the synthetics, semi-synthetics. I think compared to other frameworks, I put this together based on, I didn't use Rhode Island because that kind of came later, but Florida, Utah, New York, and then the proposed Massachusetts regulations. I didn't use North Attleboro because that was really kind of bare bones, but compared to all of those, I think it stands out in terms of the provisions that it addresses. And then I think, given that it really does seem that the state is moving in this direction, that we should move on this, because if they do, and now I don't pretend that I know exactly how this works in terms of preemption, but my understanding is that if we have a tighter regulation than the state does, we may be allowed to keep that. I think if the state, and I could be wrong about this, but if the state were to move forward and we didn't do anything, we may get kind of lax and just think, well, the state will do it and go along with that. I don't think, if we're saying that we're going with regulation, I don't think it hurts to do this now and discuss this now and talk about whether or not we want to send it for review by town council. So that's all I have. If Maurice or any of you folks have.
That was my biggest question, was that if the state comes out with a looser regulation than what you've drafted, will our regulation being stricter stay in play, or is that a question we have to ask legal?
I think that's a question you have to ask legal, because I think that there are examples of both.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
right, and then our vote tonight is just to send the draft, what we've written, to legal for review.
correct.
That's what tonight is.
And then the idea would be that if there was any substantive change or something, maybe we would ask legal to come here and explain it to us, or something like that, right? I mean, if it was significant and needed any major change.
Dr. J, that's the conversation we can have with them.
Okay.
So,
And then my other question that I have, which I think goes to Raj, is, Raj, so how does this draft regulation get enforced by you?
Chief, will be similar to any other regulation, right, that we enforce. So like we have a tobacco regulation, right? So it'll be enforced in a regular way,
But,
we enforce.
But I think my question is though, if you show up at a store and they're out of compliance, is there fines? What do we have?
There is a fine system in the regulation.
Okay, so we have fines built in.
Yep, and the way that it is written, and this is why you need the legal review. Raj could go in and essentially, for whatever reason, certainly if they didn't have a certificate of analysis that met the specs, and he's not taking that with him back to the office. It's taken off the shelf and it's held by the folks at the store. If you suspect anything that's awry, you have the authority, according to this, to have them pull back the product. You can if you wanted to, though I know we don't want to get into this business. And again, you're not dealing with synthetics, so you know, so it's probably easier. But if you wanted to test a product, you have the authority to do that using the same process that's required in the regulation for the distributor to use. And the manufacturer needs to make sure that they're getting a COA that shows that that is done. I know it seems, it can seem sort of confusing, but I've just been like thinking about this so much, it really isn't. And I would be open to helping or whatever, even just like talking to store owners, you know, about, you know, educating them about this is what you can have. Because listen, what happened in Northampton was they put a regulation in place. I don't know if it was this time last year or if it was 2 years ago at this point, but they put a regulation in place. I talked to the health commissioner about this, and she said that they had a lot of stores selling the 7-hydroxy, let's just say the concentrated product or the pills or whatever. It didn't seem like they were doing a lot of leaf, right? And they put the regulation in place, and the people still continued to sell the products. She thought it was because they were confused as to what they could sell and what they couldn't sell. So their resolution to that was just to simply ban everything. It was just going to make it easier. I don't disagree with that, but I did ask her if you had in your regulation the requirement for a certificate of analysis, would that have made a difference? And she said something to the effect of possibly. So I think requiring them to actually have that, I mean, that might be a barrier right there. If I'm a store owner and you're telling me I need to pay attention to this certificate of analysis, you know, maybe it's not worth it. I'm not sure.
I'm on the fence here, right? I mean, I see both sides, right? I'm literally seeing both sides. Is there a way that we could add in, just throwing this idea out, that if a store owner wants to do this and follow our regulation that we've come up with, that before they can do it, they actually have to come in front of the board?
I don't know. I mean, Raj, you could speak to that. I can tell you that in Rhode Island, they are required to register to sell it. I thought we didn't want to necessarily get into that, so I was kind of starting out this way.
Here's what I'm thinking, and just, this is my thought.
Yep.
We've had tobacco violations that have come in front of the board, and after we have a discussion, we don't usually ever have a problem with that business again. What if we got out in front of this ahead of time and we make it very clear, you know, here are the regulations, this is what's going to be checked, you know, I'm just throwing that out there.
But then, Chief, how we have to go then is, right, we permit it, you know, like if we do it for tobacco, somebody need to sell it, we need to permit them, you know, so that'll be the process, you know,
So couldn't we permit them in coming in front of the board?
we certainly can.
With
you know,
the,
so
and
but-
come up with, because then we can talk to them about
I
how.
would have no problem with that. I just don't know how it works, so I don't feel like I can
But what
speak.
I'm saying is that we can just say, you know, it's behind the counter, it's this, you're gonna check ID, you're gonna, you
Yeah.
know, and just make sure they're very clear on what the board is expecting.
Thoughts, Dave?
Thoughts?
So this does get to what I was, two questions that came into my head was one, and I think this has come up in a previous discussion, but I can't remember the answer. Oh, yep. so the question that I have is like, do we know anybody who is selling any of these products in town now?
Not at this point, you know, so we have couple, you know, that was doing it in the food form.
Right.
That we have required them to take it off.
Yep. And so I guess the second question was, you know, do we have any feedback? And I say this being cognizant of the fact that Jay's put a lot of work into this already, so I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to dump all over any of the effort that you've already made, but I didn't know if there was any discussion with vendors about whether they would, you know, with this regulation, if they would feel comfortable or not. So that's just a question that popped into my head.
And again, and for me, if, you know, getting something out sooner than later, especially if ours can be more restrictive than if the state has something very broad, having that in place, I like that idea, you know? We should just, Maurice, I just want to make sure, Maurice, any questions or comments, Maurice?
Yeah, so I mean, I took a look at everything and, you know, obviously with everything Jay just said, it's, you know, a beautiful draft. I like pretty much everything about it. I can't think of one thing I don't like. Um, I do agree with you, Ed, that it feels like we could get ahead of the issue. My only thought is like we've been talking about this for, you know, so long. I'm just thinking like, can we get something out sooner? Like, can we try to work with what we have for now, and then if we want to work on like a permitting process in the future, at least we'll have something like in place, acting right now, protecting people.
Mr. Morris, only comment I will have is, you know, like, we don't have a problem, right? Like, there is nobody per se, to our knowledge, selling at this point, right? So, and then we need to check even, right, that, you know, if anybody, any other community out of the 351 is even permitting them or going that route, you know? So I am, at this point, I don't know if somebody's permitting that way, you know? So we need to look at it. Dr. J, any idea if somebody's permitting on this, you know?
In Ashland?
No, I mean, in Mass.
No, not that I am aware of.
Yeah, I think to add to my like earlier question, the comment, so I asked, you know, would a retailer sell under this suggested regulation? Like, if they don't, that's fine too. Like, you know, we're not trying to get this stuff into the community necessarily. We're just trying to, if there's a demand and that demand creates a supply, we want to make sure that the supply isn't going to endanger the public's health.
Right, it's about control, and I made sure that looking through this, like I was looking at different things that were sold online which were considered like reputable, the reputable vendors and what they have listed in terms of their labeling and all of that. So I wasn't trying to make it something that was just, you know, outrageously difficult to comply with. So I think in that sense it's fine, but that doesn't really get to your concern, Ed. All I can say is I wouldn't have a problem with that, but I don't know what that requires.
So I'm going to make a friendly add to the document, which has to go in front of legal counsel anyway. If we vote on this to send this to legal, all I'm going to say is that we add a paragraph that just says any store owner that wants to comply with this regulation prior to them selling any product has to come in front of the board.
Can do that. So not necessarily permitting.
Not
but
necessarily
speak with
permit,
us.
come in front of the board so we can make sure they understand the regulation, the way we've written it,
Yeah, I think
and
that's
that,
reasonable.
and what's expected.
The way that it would probably play out is that somebody's selling it, they don't know or they could be selling it having read the regulation. I mean, they should, but and then they would come to us at first. Or you get the person that starts to sell it. Raj goes into a store and finds out, oh, you didn't come before us. Is that a penalty?
Dr. J,
Is that a fine?
my understanding is gonna create a loophole, because anybody we're gonna catch, they're gonna say they didn't knew, so that's like,
Right.
how do we enforce that? Like, I guess if we have to go through the process, right, and if we are leaning towards permitting, I guess the best way is to permit it because it's gonna make our lives very easy, because guess what? If I have to deal with one vendor, over 80 vendors in town, right, then I'll know who is selling and we keep an eye, right?
Okay, so you're saying permitting is easier for you?
Absolutely, and then, sorry, Chief, I mean, permitting, yes, it's adds another thing, but like, at least we know who's selling it, right?
Yeah.
Instead of everybody else, right? That's make our life easier, so.
Yes.
So I want to add then, prior to a permit being issued, they have to come in front of the board.
So I need to look into how these types of things are worded.
Sorry to add work.
No, it's all right, it's already done.
I think.
The permit can be granted just by the board, it don't have to be at our level, at the health department level, it can be just voted by the board, and either that is totally fine, if the board have to grant them the permit, then it's good.
Okay, so they need to come before the board in order to receive the permit. Correct. And then if you're out doing your rounds and you see that somebody's selling it that does not have a permit,
He can order them to stop.
is that a penalty? So you just need to think about that.
Yep, it's a violation of the
a
regulation,
violation.
So, and then we can deal with, we can give a warning, and then, next time go the fine,
All right, let me think about how this would. Maurice, do you have anything to add to that or concerns about that?
No, I think that's a good idea.
All right, let me see how I can wordsmith that.
Is there wording in the tobacco regulations?
It's
that
probably
you could-
similar to that, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because you.
I was like, could I please ask a question? I don't know how to ask, if I can ask a question. One thing that did come up today in my conversation with Dr. Kolodny was heavy metal poisoning. And he said what's happening is when there's a concentrate ban, is that people are taking a lot of the whole leaf to increase the amount of metragenine they're taking so that they get, kind of that conversion to 7-hydroxy by the body and they can get the effect. And he said with that, people are getting heavy metal poisoning. So I didn't know if the COA includes like heavy metal. I just didn't know. I just couldn't remember reading it. I thought it probably did, but
I think
he
it
said in
does.
particular, he said interestingly, like manganese poisoning is something that's popping up. So so I just wanted to draw attention to that and just say, even though you have a limit on the product, there's no limit, and I think we did talk about this, whether or not you're going to limit how much someone could purchase, because without purchase limits, people could buy a lot of it. And if they're
Right.
buying a lot of it and they're using a lot of it, then you wind up, it's just, whatever, so.
Right, okay. Do you see that in there?
Yeah, so it does, so section 7E says that the COA shall include, amongst other things, heavy metals, including at a minimum arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury. I mean, I think the difficulty, I'm actually not as familiar with COAs according to the GMP, 21 CFR, Part 11, and so forth. I don't know, I mean, there are a lot of metals. And the good news is, that the techniques for detecting metals go pretty low, but I don't know exactly what is required in those regulations and so forth. And I would think like manganese is not typically one that's like, you get toxicity from, but, yeah. Right. Yep, yep.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's, I think, the best we can do there.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
It's on the list.
I mean, I understand, like, the ban would solve those sorts of problems, but on the other hand, it seems to me that somebody would have to go to a tremendous amount of effort, and it sounds like they are still. Right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I am not disagreeing with you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would say that's why we're doing it.
this way we can be more restrictive if the state comes out with a very loosey-goosey regulation. But, well, if they ban, then, right, then that, right,
If they ban, then we ban.
right, right.
Okay.
So, go ahead, Jay.
All right, so let me make the motion then that with, following the addition of what we discussed, where there's language about permitting and requiring a vendor to come before the board in order to receive that permit, with that language built into this, the motion is, and I'll get that to you, the motion would be to send it to town council for comment and review and comment.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Any further discussion? Maurice, anything?
No.
No? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, so it's going to go to legal counsel, and then once that goes to legal, we will have it on, Raj, you'll have to let us know once legal has the opportunity to review and make comments.
Dr. J is gonna input those and then we send it to legal, correct?
Yeah, and I'll probably ask you some questions about
Sure.
what,
So,
yeah.
once you have the final draft ready, please send it our way,
yeah,
we'll send it to legal.
yeah, I'll do it over the next couple of days.
Thank
Great.
you, sir.
Thank you, everybody. This is a good discussion, and we'll keep moving on with this. Amy, thank you.